I'm Adam.
And I'm Cupcake. And
This is Where There's a Williams,
There's a Way.
Hey, Cupcake, do you know how to play the piano?
Are you saying that just because I'm a cow I couldn't play the piano?
No.
That I'm much too big to sit on a bench and tickle the ivory?
No.
That I'm not cultured enough to appreciate this type of music?
No, to none of these things. I've always wanted to learn how to play the piano, but I haven't made any real effort to learn. I was just wondering if you did.
No, I can't play the piano. My hooves aren't dexterous enough for me. I do have a cousin that plays, though.
Great. In today's book, a little girl gets to play for the President of the United States. Let's get started. Dancing Hands, How Teresa Carreño Played the Piano for President Lincoln by Margarita Engle and Rafael López. When Teresa was a little girl in Venezuela, Mama sang lullabies while Papa showed Teresita how to let her happy hands dance across all the beautiful dark and light keys of a piano. At first, making music seemed magical, but Teresa soon learned that playing a piano could be hard work. Sometimes she had to struggle to make the stubborn music behave as she practiced gentle songs that sounded like colorful birds singing in the dark and light branches of a shade-dappled mango tree, and powerful songs that roared like prowling jaguars beside towering waterfalls in a mysterious green jungle. If Teresa felt sad, music cheered her, and when she was happy, the piano helped her share bursts of joy. By the time she was 6, she could write her own songs, and at 7 she performed in the peaceful chapel of a magnificent cathedral, playing hymns that shimmered like hummingbirds. Music was Teresita's delight, but suddenly when she was 8, a war changed everything. Guns blazed, swords flashed, and poor Papa had to rush the whole family down to the seashore and onto a ship, into a storm where the wind howled, waves rolled, barrels tumbled, ropes snapped, and clouds buckled and kicked across the wild sky like angry mules. By the time the ship arrived in New York, Teresa felt lost. She was homesick. How could she ever play happy songs again in this unfamiliar country where she did not know a single friend? Few people spoke Spanish, and all around her, curious strangers stared and whispered, as if her whole family belonged in a museum of oddities.
Poor girl. I know what it's like moving from far away. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere to New York also.
Where was the farm? California?
No, upstate. It was like 4.5 hours away.
I think you're underestimating the scale of change that Teresa went through. First, she moved due to civil unrest in her own country. Then she moved more than 3,000 miles away to a place where they didn't even speak the same language.
She could have just had her phone translate for her. You know, you gotta find creative solutions to your problems.
I agree that you have to use critical thinking skills, but outside the box and all. But cell phones weren't invented until more than 100 years after she made her trip to New York.
I guess that explains why she was sailing on a ship and wearing those funny clothes.
Worst of all, there was fighting on too. The horrible Civil War. North battling South as soldiers marched and newspaper boys hollered about victories, defeats, funerals, and fears. Without a new piano, Teresa would have felt even more lonely. But soon she discovered that whoever one is, some people are friendly, drawn together by songs. Musicians came to her home playing along while they listened to the dazzling notes of her dancing hands. Determined to improve, Teresa practiced graceful waltzes and sonatas, booming symphonies, and lively folk songs. Her strong hands accepted the challenge of life's many dark and light moods. People began to call her the Piano Girl. Her picture was in the newspaper and on posters advertising concerts where she performed with great orchestras that invited her to play solos. Teresa triumphed in enormous theaters where children clapped and cheered while their parents stood up and tossed roses. With Papa at her side, she traveled to elegant cities, and by the time she was 10, the Piano Girl grew so famous that she received amazing invitations, including one so special that she could hardly believe her eyes. President Abraham Lincoln wanted her to play for his whole family at the White House. But the country was still at war, so Teresa arrived in Washington, D.C. at a time when freed slaves were signing up to be soldiers. The injured moaned, and nurses groaned from the sheer weariness of caring for so many fevers and wounds. Not long ago, the president's young son had fallen sick and had died. Men argued about battles lost, battles won, speeches made, victories delayed. Teresa began to worry. How could music soothe so much trouble? Poor Abraham Lincoln. Teresa hoped she could entertain the president, his grieving wife, and their 2 surviving sons. Her fingers might stumble, the rhythms emerging too slow or too fast.
That's tough. She left one country that was going through a war, only to come to another that was divided. Out of the skillet into the fire, as they say. True enough. At least it seems like she's found some other musicians that share her passion. When I was that age, I don't really think that I had a passion for doing anything except maybe just playing. That's what she was doing. Yes, but she was playing an instrument. I was playing with toys in the dirt. What about you? Do you have passions as a kid? I was always rescuing animals. Like hurt and lost animals? No, I caught animals and brought them to my house. Then they got to live a better life with me. So, is that actually rescuing them? Or is it really just kidnapping? Potato, tomato. You say kidnapping, I say adoption. Either way, you wouldn't see Mr. Fluffypuss complaining.
But Teresa was brave, and she believed in trying her best. So she entered the White House silently, clutching Papa's hand fiercely as they stepped into a room so red that it looked like a storm or a sunrise. Teresa remembered how it felt to be a homeless refugee, and how lonely she had been surrounded by strangers, some of them rude and others kind. The memory of meeting past challenges now helped her fingers dance, celebrating the way life had turned out to be a mixture of all sorts of feelings, happy and sad. But the piano was poorly tuned, making her music sound ugly. What should she do? Refuse to play? She stopped, feeling discouraged, until Mr. Lincoln smiled kindly and asked for his favorite song, "Listen to the Mockingbird." Teresa knew she could play this lively piece even on an imperfect piano, so her fingers leaped across all the glorious dark and light keys, improvising the way mockingbirds do, the melody changing as she went along. Music swirled, twirled, and soared on wings of sound. The president listened quietly to notes that rose, swayed, rippled, and dipped like a bird in a blue sky above a green forest. He closed his eyes, nodded his head, stretched his long fingers, and tapped the tips of his shiny shoes. When the joyful song ended, Abe Lincoln stood up and clapped, smiling at the piano girl, who smiled too, because she knew that her music had brought comfort to a grieving family, at least for one brief, wonderful evening of dancing hands. From then on, Teresa felt certain she would always be bold enough to share her musical courage anywhere in the world, simply by letting her fingers travel across all the beautiful dark and light moments of hope.
Imagine how good that'd make you feel. Listening to her music, that sounds splendid. That too, but I was actually talking about Teresa. Imagine how you'd feel being so good at such a young age that you could perform for the president. I would imagine that she never doubted what she wanted to do in the world. Did you always want to be a teacher? It was always something that I considered, but I've always had a wide variety of interests, so it was hard for me to narrow things down to one thing. I always liked kids, so it wasn't a stretch for me to work with them one day. What about you? I've always liked cats and food, but not cat food. I was a lunch lady until I won the lottery. You won the lottery? How do you think that I afforded such a lavish lifestyle? I had no idea. I mean, co-hosting a read aloud video for kids' books, could it get any better? Maybe not. I'm glad you like them so much. Thank you for inviting me. Speaking of liking things, if you like this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. I'm Adam. And I'm Cupcake. And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way.
Historical note. Maria Teresa Carreño Garcia de Sena, 1853 to 1917, was born into a musical family in Venezuela. Her father was a politician and amateur pianist who taught her how to play. By the time she was 6, she was already composing her own music, and soon she was performing. In 1862, a revolution forced her family into exile. After they settled in New York, Teresa played at Irvine Hall. She received several piano lessons from Louis Moreau Gottschalk, and in 1863, her original composition, Gottschalk Waltz, was published. She played as a soloist with the Boston Philharmonic and traveled to Cuba, where she performed to great acclaim. In the fall of 1863, Teresa received an invitation to play for President Lincoln. He had already freed the enslaved people with his Emancipation Proclamation, and the Union had triumphed at Gettysburg. Saddened by the death of his son, Willie, and worried about the future of the nation, Lincoln often took comfort in musical performances, including concerts by Teresa Carreño's teacher, Gottschalk. After her White House performance, Carreño toured Europe, where she played for the famous composers Giannaccio Rossi and Franz Liszt. Later, tours took her all over the world, including Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. She returned to Venezuela only once because her countrymen disapproved of her, scandalized by the independent spirit that caused her divorce 3 times before finding happiness with her 4th husband. Teresa Carreño became known as a composer and opera singer, as well as one of the best pianists of her era, playing with such an intense spirit that audience members claimed they could hear the power of tropical nature in her music. She settled in Berlin, but returned to New York during World War I. Her remains, concert gowns, piano, and many of her documents were eventually returned to Venezuela, where she is remembered as La Leona, the lioness of the piano.
Did you know the word piano is the shortened version of the word pianoforte, which means soft, piano, and loud, forte. The piano was invented in Italy in 1709 by a harpsichord maker, Bartolomeo de Francesco Cristofori.